Welcome to Magalia Rose Studio. Today we're going to talk about YUPO. If you've had experience with or heard about YUPO, you might have one of two reactions. Your heart may begin to race with apprehension on how to work with this unusual surface, or equally, your heart may race with excited anticipation. With a little preparation and practice, I hope you'll be able to set aside apprehension and enjoy this fascinating surface. Let's look at some samples. If you're unfamiliar with YUPO and wonder simply what is it, I've heard the word. It is simply a product that looks like flat paper. It is made from polypropylene, which is basically plastic. Unlike your regular rag watercolor papers, it resists the water and the watercolor. It does not absorb it, which allows you to have some very nice bright colors, as you can see here. And for example, if we bring a little bit of water, which will be hard to see with the white on white, it simply beads up and it will run. So what you need to know is if you're a novice, I recommend you use a flat surface initially. You can put it on a board or whatever like this, and as you become more comfortable with it, you can start moving that water and pigment around. Now, like watercolor paper, YUPO comes in different weights and sizes, and for most general use, I like the 11 by 14 74-pound pad of 10 sheets, and this comes to a little bit over $2 a sheet, and of course smaller sizes are less expensive. You can also buy it in large sheets just like watercolor paper, which is something that I do quite often since I become more experienced and understand the paper a little bit better. I feel like I can go ahead and do things larger, but for beginning, go ahead with something small just to get used to it. Here are a couple of hints that I've gleaned over the time I've worked with YUPO from various teachers and sources. The first is when you have water in your containers. I have one for cleaning my brush, one for mixing my colors, and I like clear containers because you can see how dirty your water is. Initially, you're going to put a couple of small drops of liquid soap, and that is about it in it. This makes the water a little more viscous, which means basically it's going to mix with the paint and move in a little slower method than just straight water. Now, do not get it to the point where it's foamy, okay? My second suggestion is to use a very, very soft brush. This is a number 2 quill brush. The nice thing about them is they can move the paint very gently on the YUPO. Also the fact that they can be shaped to a monstrously terrific point, as you can probably see here, or even into sort of a cat's tongue so that you can move the paint around in that way. So use a soft brush when possible. Don't go buying something before you know if you're going to use it, but it's a good idea to keep that in mind. Lastly, never touch the YUPO you're going to use fresh from the pad of paper with bare hands. Always use gloves. These are my little cotton gloves. Now, if I'm not real concerned with the pieces I've shown you earlier, I use bare hands. But remember, even freshly washed hands still have oils, and when they are pressed onto the paper can leave an area where it will resist both the color and the regular water, so that you're going to end up with blotches. So just these are some of the things to think about. And now let's look at some of the things we can do with that YUPO. Now let's proceed to putting some actual paint on the YUPO and watching how it behaves. As you can notice, I have a couple of paper towels that I keep around to rest my hand on so that I don't actually touch the YUPO. Now if you are going to be doing a drawing or whatever, you can use a number 2 pencil on the YUPO. You can trace it through with a light box if you have a tracing you'd like to put onto the YUPO. So just for fun, I'm just going to go ahead and make some different areas here. I'm going to get some paint and watercolor, and I have mixed that just drop or two of the good old-fashioned liquid dish soap into that water. Now I'm going to go ahead and you're going to see how it goes on. Now this is nice. I can come in just as with watercolor and drop in deeper colors. No problem with any of that. I'm going to go ahead on to another color. Now if you do not want your colors to bleed together, you're going to have to keep some distance from them. Or you can wait till an area is dry, and then you don't have to worry about having them bleed together. Now this is one of the fun things about YUPO, and you can work it to your advantage with just a little bit of care and have some really exciting things happen with it. Let's see, let's go for a little obnoxious color here. There we go. A little golden green here. Okay, now these are still pretty liquid. I'm going to clean my brush. Now what would happen, and I call this breaking the dam, if I pull this into the color adjacent to it, it's going to start bleeding into it. Now if you tip your paper, you can make it move even more. So be careful and be sure you understand how your colors are going to mix. I advise you do not use a hair dryer to promote a quicker drying process. That could lead to some pretty bizarre movement. Now you've seen how it just sort of blends and goes. One of the most fun ways of adding texture to YUPO is to give it a couple of moments to settle in. And I like to use alcohol, either the 91% or the 70% rubbing alcohol, isopropyl. And if you spray it onto the wet, not the dry, but the wet paint on YUPO, it does some really funny things. A lot of the color will move back in, but if you wait even longer when it's dry, just a hair dryer but still not dry, those marks will stay a little more definite. So these are some of the basic tricks of dealing with YUPO when it's wet. What can you do once it dries? Do you have any options? Yes, you do. Let's take a look at that. Here is a small test piece of YUPO, and the figure of the flowers and the rooster are completely dry. In fact, they've been dry for several days. What if I want to lighten an area? That is absolutely no problem whatsoever. You can use a brush in one way and just gently lift some of the YUPO. You can use a paper towel and lift off that extra pigment. You can move some of the pigment around by reactivating it and just gently kind of lighten it if that's what you want. Another thing you can do is add a little bit of water, let it sit a moment, and you can even make striations with a tool that's not too sharp. I use a little plastic palette knife. So you have these options. You can also add a little bit of texture by wetting a sponge. I like just the natural sea sponge. And if you press it in and kind of wiggle, it'll start lifting off some of the paint so you can get texture. If you end up and don't like your painting at all, you're very tired of it, you can just usually wash a lot of it off, dry it, and start over. So you can see you have some options even once it's dry. Here's that little sample that I was putting together, dried, with all the marks and interesting textures from alcohol that I sprayed on at different steps of the drying process. As I said, when it's very wet, nothing really happens too much, but as it dries in different stages, you can get some amazing effects. Now, lastly, when you have a painting you are completely done with, and you are ready to get it framed, that type of a thing, such as this is, I finished this a couple of days ago, my blue elephant. What you want to do at that point is to put a spray fixative of some type on it. This is one made by Blair. Any type of craft sealant that's matte and clear will work. That way you know that if accidentally any water or moisture makes contact, that your YUPO will not be altered in any way, the paint on that YUPO. So I've just begun to give you some of the ideas of what you can do with YUPO and what can be done. So I really hope that you take the challenge. Get some YUPO, get some watercolor paint on there, and see what you can come up with. Thank you for watching.